I was chelating at about age 41, and the results were really profound improvement. And probably I didn't even get all done chelating, but dramatic improvement. Asthma went away, allergies dramatically reduced, number of foods I could eat went up from 4 to about half the foods in the world with no problem. Energy went up from, not really being able to do anything but sit in the house to being able to, do business, run around, go dancing, stuff like that. Ability to concentrate went from, almost farcically bad, where I remember this many times, sitting there at the table staring at the bottle of pills, wondering if I'd taken one 5 minutes ago like I was supposed to and not being able to remember. And, having to do things like count them and figure it out or keep a checklist and remember what, then I'd be looking at the checklist, not checked off, trying to remember if I was there to check it off because I just took the pill or if I hadn't taken the pill yet and I couldn't remember. To the point of being able to concentrate well enough to write books, do business, play chess, stuff like that.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hoda Labrada Gore. This is episode 48, and my guest is Dr. Andy Cutler. Andy has a PhD in chemistry from Princeton and a bachelor's in physics from the University of California. He struggled with symptoms that no doctor could explain, and when he found the root cause, he made it his cause to turn things around, both for his own benefit and for the benefit of countless others. The problem he had was mercury toxicity, and its source were the fillings in his mouth. Andy is a pioneer of a form of chelation that is unique in its approach. It's safe and successful where many others are not. In today's episode, you will learn about the symptoms of mercury toxicity and how they can be addressed to restore health. Listen and you'll understand why Andy is in such demand as a detox consultant. Before we get into it, I want to thank our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported in part by Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture Products offering fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, and coconut oil in a variety of products and blends. Visit greenpastureproducts.com. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. Go to their website, westonaprice.org, and click on the words Free Info Pack. The little graphic on the left-hand sidebar will get you a free information packet with dietary guidelines and information on the Foundation's important work. Go to westonaprice.org. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Andy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I understand you are a chemist, and you discovered that you had mercury poisoning when you were working in a lab and all that sort of stuff. Is that where you got it?
No, I didn't get poisoned in the lab despite working with a long list of horrible chemicals at various times. Got poisoned from the fillings in my teeth and probably from mercurochrome. And, may at some point have had a significant occupational exposure, but that was years and years before I got very sick and wasn't a big contributor to it.
So you got poisoned by the fillings in your teeth. Wait a minute. A lot of people have fillings.
And the silver ones really aren't silver. They're really mercury with a little bit of silver to hold it together.
So it seems to me a good part of the population could be at risk. Tell us more about how you got to the bottom of that being the culprit of your illness.
I was spending lots of time going to doctors, not really getting much help and information, lots of time looking up medical stuff in the library, realizing I was getting very sick and doctors couldn't figure it out, didn't really understand how sick I was.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, somebody convinced me to see the local witch doctor, which is a term I use affectionately. I hope any physicians listening don't take that personally. And the guy said, basically, of course, you have mercury poisoning from your fillings, which I was very surprised by, but brought flooding back to me these memories of asking a dentist about the mercury in the fillings and him saying, oh, it's locked up, it's passive, blah, blah, blah. Like months later, taking a physical chemistry class where I would have learned better than that, but it never had occurred to me in the intervening 20-some years to think about that and put the two together. I realized dentists couldn't possibly be right. The mercury had to be getting out. Since there's a long history in chemistry of people managing to get themselves mercury poisoned. It's a very well understood occupational risk, and people know it's really dangerous. They have some idea of the symptoms. It's pretty clear to me, that was going on.
Interesting. So all the other doctors that you consulted with, except for this alternative doctor, they didn't suspect mercury poisoning?
Didn't suspect it. Well, it's not true they didn't suspect it. It's really interesting. One of the guys who was pretty good, early on in the process, I came in talking about this and that. And for a minute, he asked me about what I do for a living, and then I work with mercury, and I thought about it. I was like, no, there's not any mercury in the lab. Hasn't been any mercury in labs. They've been there for the last couple of years. And then he went on and talked about a whole bunch of other stuff. Decided that with what was going on, he wanted to just wait and see and repeat tests in a while, see what happened. Later, I would figure out reading the medical books that all the books say, it's an occupational disease. Nobody really gets it unless they work with mercury. You can rule the diagnosis out if you ask them if they work with mercury, and they say no. And that's what he did. If he'd run a test at that point, he could have saved me 10 years of grief.
Wow.
But he didn't. He was a sharp guy and knew exactly what the book said and did it.
So I imagine there, as we were saying, a large portion of the population is also mercury toxic and is unaware of it because they don't work with mercury. So they think they must have these symptoms coming from something else. Can you describe some of the symptoms of mercury toxicity?
Yeah, they have disease names: chronic fatigue, allergies, asthma, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, stuff like that, MS, lupus, diabetes. Depression is a very common symptom. If you read the medical literature, you find out the books are actually a lot better than what doctors do nowadays. Interesting. And the older books are written by doctors that saw a lot of mercury poison patients and realized it. Nowadays, they're written by doctors who do, in fact, see a lot of mercury poison patients, but they miss it all the time. They don't think they've ever seen one.
I see.
So they read the old books and recite stuff and make it sound kind of silly because they didn't really get it. But if you read the old books, you realize they all talk about how the first symptoms are these psychological things that are really hard to catch, and you think they're depressed, but really it's mercury. They get all this social withdrawal and this and that. They don't complain about it because it doesn't bother them, and that's mercury. And then later they become emotionally volatile and agitated and depressed and get tired and have their blood pressure go up. We go on and on and on. And they talk about, it can look like ALS, it can look like Parkinson's disease, so on. And all these medical texts won't tell you, in the Parkinson's disease section, they won't tell you check for mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Only one of them will say, actually, that mercury poison can be easily confused with Parkinson's disease. But they will say to check for other very rare conditions that can be confused with Parkinson's disease. And so doctors check for all this rare stuff, which being rare, almost nobody has. They might go through their whole career and not find one. And they don't check for mercury, which most of their Parkinson's patients do have.
Wow.
So instead of doing something that makes them all better, we give them drugs to let them last longer while they slowly suffer and die. They're doing their job. Patients think they're doing their job.
Right. And people think, well, I have, ALS or I have MS and this is my prognosis. There's nothing to do. And yet you're suggesting that mercury is the underlying problem and it can be addressed.
Yeah. The problem is everybody has their head turned around to this expectation of, I know what's wrong. This is what's going to happen. And that doesn't motivate them to do the rational thing, which any sane person, if you step back and stop saying medicine or white coat and so on, would realize. Somebody says, you have this, you're going to die. Rational thing is to say, well, maybe I have it, I'm going to die, and there's no hope. But maybe I have something else. I really ought to check for everything else, because a lot of the other stuff can be cured.
Uh-huh.
But instead, everybody's like, well, once the doctor says I have MS, once the doctor says my kid's autistic, whatever, just like, that's it. That's the way it is.
Yeah, there's a sense of acceptance. Say I'm a person that wants to investigate what the root cause of my health problem is, and it may be indeed mercury toxicity. How would I go about finding that out?
Well, that's kind of the rub, because most doctors will assure you it can't be. So you either have to start reading medical books, which will all say it's rare and you don't have it, but at least will describe it accurately if you're reading an older book. Or you have to read alternative medicine sources, or you have to go on the internet. And, The internet contains some very accurate material in areas where the professional fields are messed up and don't know what they're doing. That's a very small fraction of the content. It contains an awful lot of drivel, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard, even for a sophisticated reader with a technical background, to tell which is which. I'll say, yeah, you need to go find the Andy Cutler Chelation Think Tank on Facebook or the Frequent Dose Chelation list on Yahoo, buy my hair test interpretation book, get a hair test, go through the symptom description of the book, look at the hair test, see what's going on. You can get hundreds of answers if you just start freewheeling on that approach.
Mm-hmm.
A really important thing to do is the same thing you should do that would motivate you to not believe the regular doctor if he says you have MS, is look at the outcomes. People say, yeah, I chelated this way. What happened? Well, the patients who did it got chelated my way by their doctor or just did it on their own. They say, I got better. And they have long-term ongoing stories that demonstrate they're really better.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about their kid got better, their kid lost their diagnosis, he's no longer autistic, he's healthy, he's in college, whatever. That's the kind of thing should convince you, yeah, look into this. You go look at all this stuff. It has a great story. Everything's wonderful. Doctor has this wonderful, web page about how he's going to cure you, but you can't find anybody on the internet who's been through that and saying, yeah, it cured me. You can't find anybody 5 years ago saying it who's still there saying they're cured. Don't go there. This is just PR. Lots of supposed medical literature is advertising.
So the proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
Yes, proof is in the pudding. If you think you have mercury poisoning, you should have all these signs and symptoms of mercury poisoning. You should be able to go get your laboratory results from your old doctor and find stuff in the lab tests that the doctor ignored because he didn't know what it means, so he decided it wasn't clinically significant.
How old were you when you were chelating, and what were the results for you?
I was chelating at about age 41, and the results were really profound improvement. And probably I didn't even get all done chelating, but dramatic improvement. Asthma went away, allergies dramatically reduced, number of foods I could eat went up from 4 to about half the foods in the world with no problem. Energy went up from not really being able to do anything but sit in the house to being able to do business, run around, go dancing, stuff like that. Ability to concentrate went from, almost farcically bad, where I remember this many times, sitting there at the table staring at the bottle of pills, wondering if I'd taken one 5 minutes ago like I was supposed to and not being able to remember.
Wow.
And, having to do things like count them and figure it out or keep a checklist and remember what, then I'd be looking at the checklist, not checked off, trying to remember if I was there to check it off because I just took the pill or if I hadn't taken the pill yet and I couldn't remember. To the point of being able to concentrate well enough to write books, do business, play chess, stuff like that.
All the things that make up regular life.
Yeah.
You re-entered the human race, basically.
Yeah, basically, yes. And one of the aspects that's kind of interesting, ordinarily people should feel best at, normal, healthy people should feel best in their 20s, and about 35 or so, they start to realize, they're getting a little old, they can't quite do the dramatic things they could do as a 20-year-old. Then it's, gradually get older. A lot of people really are toxic most of their lives, these slow, ongoing exposures. So I really found after I chelated, I felt the best I ever had in my life at 42, 43, because it's toxic enough in my 20s and 30s to not have felt that good. You get older, so I'm sure I didn't feel as good as somebody should have at 20 or 30. But from my perspective, and I believe the perspective of a lot of people who've been chronically intoxicated, been getting this stuff for years and years, chelate, and you can really feel as good as you ever have in your life.
We want to pause now and thank our sponsors, Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture Products produces fermented cod liver oil and concentrated butter oil in a variety of flavors in liquid gel and capsule form. They also offer organic virgin coconut oil, virgin coconut ghee. Lastly, they produce skincare balms and various byproducts that enrich the soil and feed of farm animals. Go to greenpastureproducts.com. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's not too late to join us at the conference. Over 40 speakers will be there, amazing food, amazing exhibitors, and all kinds of attendees in Montgomery, Alabama, November 9th to the 13th. Register at the membership level, even if you're not a member, and use the code WAPF for an additional $50 off. Learn, eat well, and have fun at Wise Traditions. Go to wisetraditions.org. I want to hear some of your stories, Andy. Obviously, you are a success story. Can you tell us some more of clients or patients that you've seen who have used your chelation protocol and seen success?
The most interesting success stories, because they're the most interestingly verifiable, and doctors usually get so upset by it. The repeated stories, women with MS. For some reason, a lot of diseases go with a particular personality type. For some reason, people with MS all are sure they're going to beat the disease, and they all seek alternative care. Most people with other diseases don't. There's a large number of people with multiple sclerosis seek alternative care. There are repeated stories of women that get their fillings removed and replaced with, non-mercury fillings and chelate for years on end. And they start out with all kinds of disability and with an MRI showing all these lesions in their brain. After a few years, they're not on disability anymore. They're back home to work. They can do things. Doctor takes an MRI, no lesions in their brain.
Oh, my goodness.
And you would think that will be cured. Well, sometimes the doctor's very interested and wants to hear more about mercury. Sometimes the doctor gets mad at them for faking it. Well, I don't know how you can fake an MRI. How you can, think bad thoughts and make the lesions appear.
Yeah, it's laughable, really. I don't know how you would either. How would the layperson be faking something like that? But it must just be their own disbelief, right? They're just like, this
they don't want to
happens.
believe it. Now, I'll talk about a whole bunch of other people and other situations, but this brings up a big part of the downfall of modern medicine, which is basically immature people going into it, is physician is going to kill people. He's going to make mistakes. The cost is human suffering and human life. That's one of the reasons they get trained so much and beat up so much to try to do it right, which then is counterproductive. But it also puts them into denial. That they have to, most of them aren't emotionally mature enough to admit they're imperfect people and mess up and stay sane. Because they have real people. If you're a neurologist, you see very messed up people who suffer a lot and then die. And you can't do a whole lot to help them if you're doing mainstream neurology.
Right.
Well, they don't want to think they're messing up and killing all their MS patients by not telling them to do mercury detox.
Speaking of other doctors, I know there are other chelation protocols out there, and I suppose we should begin by defining what chelation is. Why don't we define what chelation is, and then can you contrast your protocol with others?
Chelation is the process by which you take some toxic metal ion that's in your body, poisoning you, and take some agent that has 2 or more binding sites in each molecule that grab onto that toxic metal and help it be excreted. Most things aren't chelating agents. They don't have 2 binding sites. A lot of things are chelating agents in a test tube because there's only water in the metal ion, but they're not chelating agents in people where you have all kinds of other things in your blood plasma. So chelation is the process where you take a chelating agent and get the metal to come out. And there's some very basic rules you have to follow that are in all medical textbooks. And like I said, textbooks are a whole lot better than medical practice. And there's all these very random chelation protocols that don't follow those rules and thus make people who do them very sick. This is like DMSA every other day, DMSA every 8 hours, DMPS injections, chlorella, cilantro, 1, 2, 3 times a day, alpha-lipoic acid 2, 3 times a day. Or give alpha-lipoic acid as an antioxidant, not realize it doesn't matter what the doctor says, the chemical doesn't listen, it chelates because it's a chelator. Chelation is this general word like antibiotic or analgesic. It's not a specific thing. People tend to use it in this very specific sense. It has a lot of controversy in medicine for reasons completely unrelated to heavy metals. When you chelate somebody, there's 2 important things. One is they not continue to be exposed to the toxin, because a chelator will help that come in, too. It's a common error. Chelate somebody with mercury fillings. Well, the chelator gets in their saliva, the chelator gets in the fluid in their tooth pulp. It sucks enormous amount of mercury out of their fillings. If you actually take a mercury filling and manage to get all the mercury from that into a person, they will die. There's far many lethal doses in every filling. It's relatively passive, so that's why you can have filling in your mouth, put it in your mouth, not fall over dead the next day. But if you take a chelating agent, which has this high affinity for really grabbing onto the metal, it'll suck the mercury right out of that filling into you. That can be very dangerous. So fillings have to be replaced, which usually involves lots of unpleasant, expensive dental work, and that's why people don't want to do it or don't want to hear it or want to have a lot of certainty of the diagnosis before they go forward.
I see, because you can't chelate unless you have your fillings taken out first.
You can't safely chelate. You can always chelate because you can always take the pills. But it's a really bad idea unless the fillings are out.
I see. So
then there's some basic rules, like for any drug. How often do you take it? Well, more or less once every half-life. So for DMSA, that means every 4 hours. For DMPS, you take it every 8 hours. For alpha-lipoic acid, you take it every 3 or 4 hours because it's a little bit shorter-lived than everything. And the dosage as well, who knows? You find out what the person tolerates, and you just kind of have some rules of thumb. But the basic rule of thumb is dosage people tolerate is highly individual, so they start at some dose and move it up or down until they find one that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just do that, take a break, do that, take a break for a long time. Eventually mercury comes out. If they have other metals, if they use the right chelator, eventually those metals come out. It's very common for people to have tons of lead in them.
Oh my goodness, this is so interesting. I'm thinking of just how helpful this can be for people. And I understand well what you're describing about your process or your protocol, because I have a friend who's been going through it. And so I'm hoping our listeners are catching on to some of these terms that might be foreign to them. But I can tell you this, Andy, I feel like people who are listening to this podcast are into alternative health. And as those people, when you mentioned being able to chelate using chlorella or cilantro, I'm thinking their ears probably perked up thinking, oh, that's natural. I would want to do that.
And the problem is those are really bad ideas and will make you worse.
Right. That's probably not what they would recognize. So it's really...
Yeah, a lot of people get in trouble with that. A lot of people get in trouble with alpha-lipoic acid, which they don't even know is chelator. So they take it because it's an antioxidant. And it still chelates. If you take it right, it makes you better. Mm-hmm. Right is every 3 or 4 hours, small doses. If you take it wrong, it makes you worse because as with lead, where most of it's in your bones, it's not poisoning you. Most of the mercury in your body is in like your thigh muscle, your kneecap, your toenail, your pancreas, something like that. It doesn't really matter because those aren't sensitive tissues. Those aren't the tissues that get poisoned easily. Take chelator improperly, it helps the mercury get stirred around and concentrate into the sensitive tissues like your brain, your thyroid gland, your adrenal glands. Makes it so that they're much sicker even though you saw a lot of mercury come out. So you don't manage it by tests, you manage it by the people get better. They want to get better. There's some basic rules they got to follow about dose timing. And in that sense, I don't have a specific protocol like a lot of doctors have specific do exactly this. I'm just like, take your DMSA every 4 hours or more often. Take your DMPS every 8 hours or more often. Don't inject it. Take it by mouth or use it transdermally. These are the rules of anything within those bounds is my protocol, and people adjust it a little bit to work out, fit their lifestyle. Because it's intellectually a simple thing. Yeah. And it's not terribly physically challenging, and there's not the drama of going to the doctor, giving him a lot of money and having a needle and stuff like that. It's very mundane, but it's very tedious. You do it for a long time. And a lot of people, they need the drama. They're not into the tedium. But like lots of things, what really gets you forward is the tedious, just keep doing it approach.
Now, I interviewed someone on this show who has followed that protocol with children and her own children, and then has advised that others do the same. And she said it's just been phenomenal. Like you said, children with autism or asthma have seen such relief. But it has to be, again, paying attention to each individual child and tailoring it according to how they respond to it all, correct?
Yeah, and in a technical sense, if you're, you kind of take the surgeon attitude of, like pain is good. You can tell everybody to do the same thing. And it'll be really miserable for a couple of years for a lot of them. But nobody for whom it's really miserable is going to keep doing it because they're not that insane, even if they're mad as a hatter from the mercury. So you adjust it so it's tolerable, and then it's going to take a while. So you figure out what else they need to take to be comfortable in the meantime. It's like a sane person will take aspirin when they hurt. Like hurting, they do something benign to not hurt. If you can chelate for a couple of years, and you'll get some relief along the way, but you'll still have some of your icky symptoms. You want to take this, that, and the other thing to relieve the symptoms. That's actually the intellectually interesting and challenging part of cases. And so it's really easy for the alternative doctors to get confused. Chelation's easy, so they don't pay attention to how important it is to do it right. They pay attention to the much more interesting and much more lucrative, all the sprinkles of magic pixie dust it takes to make this person feel better now while they chelate. And that is important in a humanitarian and a practical sense, like so they can keep a job,
right?
So they don't get divorced. But in an ultimate sense, you have to chelate them properly, or the outcome's not going to be good.
You do recommend in your protocol that people take supplements to shore them up while they're going through the process.
Yes. A lot of the mechanism of toxicity of mercury and lead and other heavy metals is that they're oxidation catalysts, and specifically mercury is used as an oxidation catalyst in organic chemistry to oxidize fatty acids. So you take vitamin C and vitamin E as antioxidants to help protect your body against that. So when you chelate, since you're moving the metals around, they're a little more toxic on their way out because they're not, your body tries to trap them, tries to passivate them. Take them out, you need a little extra protection. The antioxidants make you feel a lot better. Mercury in particular interferes with your body's ability to move minerals around to where they need to be. So generally people with mercury have too low of zinc and too low of magnesium. I suggest they all take it automatically. Almost always going to be helpful. Magnesium in particular is one that regular doctors don't pay a lot of attention to, but if you don't have it, you're spacey and weak, and can't track things, and don't have energy, generally feel miserable. You can get muscle cramps, your blood pressure can go up. Magnesium is very cheap, very benign, prevents all that, makes people feel a lot better.
Well, speaking of that,
when they have mercury, they need a lot of it. They need more than a normal person.
Well, and that's one thing I like about your protocol. This ALA that you've mentioned can be benign if a person isn't mercury toxic. It's an antioxidant, correct? So you could take it, and if you're completely well with none of these heavy metals, you'll be fine. It's just beneficial. But if you have a reaction, isn't there a little test you can do to see, like a 3-day test to take it periodically and see if you react? It may mean that there is something in your system.
Yeah. What you can do, which don't do with fillings in place, take alpha-lipoic acid every 3 hours, every 3 or 4 hours for 3-day periods. Start on the morning of day 1 and end at bedtime on day 3. If you take 25 or 50 milligrams, you probably feel something if you have some heavy metals in you. If you don't feel anything at all, try 100 milligrams next weekend. If you don't feel anything at all, I'd suggest try 200, but realistically speaking, almost everybody who's toxic will definitely know it by the last day, and the day after. The day after is the one where you're the worst, you're tired, cranky, depressed, have lots of side effects. If you don't have a clinically significant amount of heavy metals in you, you can do that, 200, 300 milligrams every 3 hours. Nothing happens. No effect. Lots of toxic people feel like they got taken out and beaten by a biker gang if they take 5 milligrams that way.
Wow. A low dosage can have a huge impact if they're sick.
Yeah. They're feeling the effects of the toxin as it moves out.
And that's when they would need to pick up and start doing the tedious process of chelation. But it sounds like your protocol is a safe and effective way to go. And I liked what you said about folks just going online, comparing, checking things out, and beware of people who are just promoting something that don't have the kind of testimonies or the stories to back it up. You really need to pay attention.
Yeah, you want to look for two things. Do they give you the basic sciences that really make sense, or do they kind of just wave their arms? And does what the people who've been through it say match what the person advocating it says? Because it's much easier to make up great sales literature that sounds wonderful and sounds very scientific than it is to really solve the problem. The problem's really solved. There will be cured people out there talking about it. And there won't be like a big list of cured people raving about it because they got cured. They get on with their lives. It's actually kind of hard to find them, but if you look on the list, you'll eventually see this is that person getting a lot better talking about it. You'll find people who said that 10 years ago on some of these lists, and you can go find them now, and they're like, yeah, life's great.
Wow.
Do all the stuff I couldn't do before.
That's amazing. What is one thing the listener could do to improve their health?
Take vitamin C with meals and at bedtime.
Vitamin C.
I give you a million other answers, one of which is eat everything off the Weston A. Price diet. But the cheap and easy one is take vitamin C with meals at bedtime.
Well, I'm going to do both of those. Andy, thank you for your time. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
My guest today was Dr. Andy Cutler, the author of Amalgam Illness. For more information on his resources and chelation protocol, go to noamalgam.com or simply go to the westonaprice.org website, click on the show notes for episode 48 for links and related information. Hey, and a big shout out to my friends at Podcast Village for their production assistance. I appreciate you all so much.
Have you been enjoying these podcasts? Have you benefited from them or from the resources on the website or local chapter meetings? If so, please become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's only $25 for students and seniors and $40 for a general membership. Your contribution is critical for the continued work of the foundation. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.